Hi everyone, my interview today is with Dr. Pauline Basinga. He is the Country Director Nigeria for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Let's find out about the work that they're doing in Nigeria, as well as the fight against COVID-19. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
This gives us an opportunity to talk about the work of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Nigeria, and also to talk about the specific work that you're doing with regards to fighting COVID-19. So it's a quick catch up, probably about 30 minutes. So yeah, so thank you for making out the time.
Wonderful.
Good.
Excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. How long have you been in Nigeria for, by the way?
I've been in Nigeria for the past 3 years, but I'm originally from Rwanda.
Yes,
And
yes.
yeah, so I moved to Seattle back in 2012, joining the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But as part of my work in Seattle, I was coming back and forth. I was supporting Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Senegal and other countries. So I've been traveling in Nigeria quite frequently. And then since 2017, I moved here with my family.
Permanently since 2017. Fantastic.
That's correct, yeah.
And I hope you're loving Nigeria and everything that it offers.
I'm loving Nigeria, especially the Nigerian people.
So much. Thank you. Now, I want to start by asking about the philosophy around what the foundation is built around. And I know it strongly says every life is equal. Can you share, what that really means and how that translates to the work that the foundation is currently doing in Nigeria?
Yes, so, we at the foundation strongly believe that, every life have equal values. And that really drives our philosophy. It's our mission statement. And we, strongly believe that no child, should die from diseases that can be prevented, from disease that can be cured. No child should, go to bed hungry and should be, suffering from stunted, etc. So we really, do our best to find new ideas and to, encourage innovative partnership to solve those problems. And yeah. So it's really the essence of the Gates Foundation work.
Is that everyone is equal, and therefore
everyone is equal. Yeah.
Everything you do. Most of your programs are based around healthcare. It's not based around creating entrepreneurs or building the next set of people to take over Nigeria. So in that we are all equal. Is the focus really just to make sure that people stay alive? Would you say that is really the essence?
I would say it's that, and also, like when we help people to really stay alive, but we also help them to thrive, right? There is two components of the equation here, like because when you prevent, child mortality, maternal mortality, etc., that is the essence of most of our work in the health sector, where we invest in primary healthcare to really make sure that kids have access to vaccines and kid can get treatment for malaria and diarrhea disease and pneumonia, etc. But at the same time, we also invest through government and private sector and other partners in programs like financial inclusion, for example, where we do our best to make some smart investment, giving Nigerians and everybody access to basic banking services so that they can have same additive economic values as they enter the industry, right? The other thing is investment in agriculture, focusing on smallholder farmers so that they can boost their productivity, so that they can have access to the better knowledge and seed and fertilizers, etc. So it's a combination of life and livelihood at the same time.
I mean, I hear you. It's just that I mean, from where I'm sitting, as a Nigerian, I just feel in my heart that it's great what you're doing, but the mission somehow, life is equal, yes, but I don't think the opportunities that everybody will get is equal because of the mere fact that the people that you are really, really focusing on are on the poverty line. We keep them alive, but really, what is next? What is next? Because outside of keeping them alive, there are still so many more stages and steps in life that they're going to have to climb to be someone that we can say, yes, they can hold their own?
What we do really when we strongly believe that all life have equal values, it's kind of like making sure that all investment that we make, it goes through that lens, but we strongly recognize that government have the main objective and duties to make sure that they lift their people out of poverty. So what we do, supporting data like evidence, etc., to really make sure that the invisible are being seen by people who are making planning and resource allocations, etc. So this is kind of like like instead of for ourselves making sure that we use our smallest resources, because we don't have resources that can replace government, right? It's very, very small. Now, how can we use that resources in a way that it can shed light to those that are not being seen, so that the bigger resources can reach them?
So it's not so much, I mean, my point is that it's not probably about making them equal. It's just about giving them an opportunity in life to be equal. Because if you're alive, then possibly you can be equal. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Now, you also talking about government earlier. Now, I also did a little bit of research about the foundation and the work that you're doing. And you say you take risks the government and corporations won't take. What are those risks that government and corporations won't take that the foundation is taking?
Yeah, we are complement to government and corporation, right? Being a private philanthropy, we have the ability, to apply new thinking to big problems, right? We can, think about, different ways of thinking and solving problems, and, taking some calculated risks, right? So we can accept, failure as part of that process. Let's say, if we need to find new, drug, etc. If you need to find new vaccines, if you need to try new way of doing things, you may, try 5 or 6 of them, and then maybe one will be effective, right? So we will be, as a foundation, really accept that risk so that we can make the initial investment. And when that innovation is successful, then government and corporation can take it and then scale it and sustain it. Okay, so this is kind of like when I talk about,
Sure. So would you, what have you done, would you say, in the last few years, the governments or corporations wouldn't do, but the foundation has taken it upon themselves to do? Are there any particular programs or projects that are very unique to the foundation that that, wow, there's no way in the world a government or a corporation would take this upon themselves?
Oh yeah, there are some examples. Let me probably pick one of them. Let's say one of the things that we do is really to try to bring people together. A few years ago, back in 2000, for example, the foundation thought that there were available vaccines, in developed countries that was saving many, many millions of kids, from diarrhea disease and pneumonia diseases, right? But those vaccines were not being, available to poor setting countries. And we took the initiative to really create the Global Alliance for Vaccine and Immunization, like Gavi, which is known today. We were, first investor in the Global Fund, for example, to really make sure that, look, if we put in money, other people will come and then, believe in it. And now those have become, big, global health initiatives that are really helping, the government. And then there are, many other, initiatives that we can, I can point on in terms of research and, development, etc.
Okay. Now, catalytic philanthropy. Please tell me about that, because how does that work?
Catalytic philanthropy. I would say, the foundation, we call ourselves impatient optimists, right? So, this is our proposed statement. It's, it reflects how we, think about, world biggest problem. So we look at problems, and then we say, like, if this is the problem, and, and this is how the government or corporation or the market should solve that problem. And then we really look very strategically and critically, what are the things that are missing that can be catalytic to help move that very quickly. And then we jump into that. That will be the role of a catalytic philanthropy. Okay. So, so
you want to be there at the cusp to make things happen, to make change happen quickly.
Quickly, yeah. Just to give you a concrete example, for example, the government of Nigeria, does a lot of programs, both at the federal and the state level, right? And sometimes they rely, they reach out to the World Bank, to get, long-term loan, to implement big, long-term development programs, right? In the process, as they are discussing with the World Bank, one of the things that we do, we can provide short-term technical assistance to really develop that program, effectively to maximize, the probability that the government will, get that loan very quickly and then implement it, or even test it in, few LGAs, to give them data to say, look, like if you can do this in few LGAs, and this is when you expand that in the large, scale, this is how much it will cost, this is how many people you'll need, etc. This is what we mean by catalytic philanthropy.
That's pretty much like a booster, like you're boosting things to get things moving very quickly. Yeah.
Exactly. And the good thing about us is, one thing I love to work for the foundation is that it's not about us. It's not about, taking credit on the work that we've done, right? It's really collective success, making sure that we bring all the partners. And at the end of the day, if the poorest of the poor benefit from that work, and then if we see child mortality decreasing, if we see vaccinations going up, if we see the productivity of smallholder farmer increasing, that's success for us.
Fantastic. Now let's talk about, let's look at everything you're doing about every life is equal. You're taking the risks that corporations and governments aren't taking, catalytic philanthropy. Now let's hone in on COVID-19 and how all these, your mission, your vision, and all the philanthropy, how does that build into the fight against COVID-19? Let's look specifically at how and what programs you have working in Nigeria right now to help fight this disaster, this global pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. The coronavirus, pandemic, really, it's unprecedented. It has put millions of lives at risk. And, when you look at the way we're approaching the work here, we're really making sure that we look at the work that we are supporting across health, agriculture, financial inclusion, and especially in the health areas where there are plenty of work that the government is doing across both, at the federal and then state level, to really build strong primary healthcare system that will continue to provide services to people who are in need of them, to just make sure that those services are preserved as much as possible. Because if those services are not preserved, the impact on, normal diseases that, Nigeria has one of the highest number of kids that are non-immunized for other diseases, right? So you have a number of, kids who have malaria, who have, pneumonia, etc. So we need to just make sure that those services in a very safe way can continue. So we are really working very closely with different partners
so
to see.
As COVID-19, even though, but if COVID-19 is at the forefront, what are the things that you're doing at the forefront of that outside? Because I guess that all your normal programs around primary healthcare are continuing, but what are you doing particularly in the, with fighting this pandemic in Nigeria? So, I wanted to talk about treatment, detection, containment, vaccination. What is the work? Can you break it down for me and just explain to me step by step the different things that you're doing at every level? Because I guess it begins with, detection and testing. Is there work? Yeah. So can you maybe take me through that entire spectrum of, testing, detection, treatment, containment, vaccination? What are you doing particularly in that area to help Nigeria at the moment?
Thank you very much, Mo. So let me say that there is no partner who's doing something particularly here. Let me just preface this by saying that, the Nigerian government is really leading, the COVID response. As you know, the president established the presidential task force for COVID-19, led by Dr. Sani Aliyu, and also they've asked the Federal Ministry of Health to really lead the overall public health response, and the Nigerian, Center for Disease Control, led by Dr. Chikwe, is really in the forefront leading that process. So what we have been doing as the Gate Foundation is to provide technical support to the PTF, the Presidential Task Force, and CDC as they develop the national, response in Nigeria.
What does that mean? What does technical response or technical expertise, what does that mean? Are you providing them with staff, or what does it amount to? I'm trying to hold, I'm looking for what is what I can say. If anyone says to me, if anyone says to me tomorrow, asks me, what is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation doing to fight COVID in Nigeria? I want to be able to say they're doing ABCD. What do I say to the average person on the street?
Oh, perfect. Yeah, definitely. If I can be specific here, I can say, look, COVID was not planned by anyone, right? So, the government, they have a, 2020 activity planned. Mm-hmm. So they needed additional, support for them to really be able to step in very quickly, mm-hmm. using government staff and using government resources, but accelerating that, plan, right? So through our grant, so the way we operate as the Gates Foundation, we provide grant. We don't implement program directly.
Okay.
So we have, even though in Nigeria, we provide money, we provide grant to partners, right? Okay. So even though the Nigeria country office is our biggest office in Africa, mm-hmm. As the Gates Foundation, so our regional office is in South Africa, mm-hmm. and then we have another office in Ethiopia, and then in Nigeria, we have staff that are grant maker. We're not implementers, right?
Okay.
So like, to be concrete, we provided, support through, people who have experience to really do, preparedness, effectiveness, etc., like the Tony Blair Institute, TBI, or the eHealth, or, the Clinton Health Access. We provide them grants so that they can give additional support to NCDC, to the PTF, to really drive that response.
But these organizations are not Nigerian based. The Tony Blair Association that you just mentioned, and the Clinton, they're not Nigerian based organizations. So who in Nigeria specifically is benefiting in terms of, when you look at Nigeria, who would you say, which partners locally? Are you supporting any local partners, or they're all international partners?
Oh, not at all. So first of all, those organizations are international partners, but they have offices in Nigeria, and they, hires, Nigerians, all those, the majority of the staff, the huge majority, because as an African, I've worked in many countries. I've been impressed by how many international organizations, when you go and see them, they're full of them are Nigerians, right? But also we have grants directly to the NCDC, for example. So we grant the Nigeria, Center for Disease Control, the Nigeria Primary Health Development Agency directly as well, right? So, and there are some local Nigerian organizations as well, like CCSIS and, other organizations as well, yeah.
So how much could you put I saw some numbers around, it said around $250 million. Is that what you've spent globally, or is that what you've just spent on the continent?
On the continent. No. So far, the Gates Foundation has committed $300 million on COVID response. So this is in addition to the money that we've committed to our other programs a year, right? So globally, the Gates Foundation spent, more than $5 billion a year for all our program globally, right? And then in addition to that, we've committed $300 million to COVID globally, and the bulk of that money is going toward accelerating, new therapeutics and diagnosis and vaccines. But then some of that money was committed to support, South Asia and African countries to really get ready for the disease. And we, provided support to the Africa CDC based in Addis Ababa, and they provided funds to AFENET, which is an African institution that is supporting NCDC, by the way. Mm-hmm. They're also supporting Nigerian CDC. And I would say approximately out of that money, close to $6 million or so US dollar will be dedicated to Nigeria. And we've been working very closely with the PTF and CDC, in discussing with them. By the way, we don't fund any partner if we don't have a go-ahead from the government to say what kind of expertise you need. And then they say, please, give us these partners or fund us directly. So it's close to $6 million that we've committed to COVID response in Nigeria.
So what sort of things are they doing with this money? In terms of what are the actual programs that they're doing to fight COVID? Is it to buy ventilators? Is it to build isolation centers? What specifically are you funding?
Oh yeah, no, I think when you look across, I think we can also, put all those information, available. They're available because we report all the funding that we provide in Nigeria to the Ministry of Budget and Finance. But basically the kind of thing that we are supporting is, strategic communication. For example, they needed support, to get local Nigerian who understand different local languages, because, when they, provide when they provide, information out to the population, given that they needed strategic information that can go out quickly in different languages, like the ability to translate quickly, to disseminate to the state so that the state can disseminate. This is one example. The other ones were kind of like to go and rehabilitate some laboratories. As you know, the Nigeria government did quite well in terms of testing. Even before the beginning of the pandemic, when they heard about the pandemic in China, etc., even before the 27th of February, I think, before the first case were detected, already 5 lab was able to detect cases in Nigeria, and they've been able to expand that to close to 18 sites so far, even though they're still doing a lot of work to expand that. This is the second thing that they're doing with the money.
I mean, what are your views on how many people we've tested? I mean, I saw some numbers, I think a couple of weeks ago, on testing and how much we've done in Nigeria versus the rest of Africa. And the numbers were quite low compared to South Africa, and compared to, I think it was Egypt and a couple of other African countries. What are your views on those numbers? Do you think that we're testing enough in Nigeria? I was looking for the numbers, I couldn't find them. Do you think we're testing enough in Nigeria at the moment?
No, testing is quite important. Testing is critical to control the pandemic, because as you test, then you are able to know who's positive, who has been in touch with who. Then you can, advise those people to, stop the transmission, etc. And the government at both federal level has put in place a strategy to really expand testing. I think the Nigeria CDC and the PTF will be in a much better position to, explain much better how the government of Nigeria is planning to expand to accelerate that testing. But I agree that we need really to accelerate testing, and they are doing their best to really accelerate that.
Okay, so anyway, I guess that's you're not going to give me any more than that, because you're not going to put yourself on the line and say that. I mean, I'm not saying that we're not doing enough testing. I mean, I believe that if we look at the numbers in Africa, even if we aren't doing enough testing, the other indices are that people are not also. It's not as if all the isolation centers or our hospitals are overflowing either. So, what gives me a certain amount of comfort personally is to say that we're not doing all the testing we need to do, but at the same time, that people aren't dropping dead on the streets as maybe we would have expected them to if it was that testing was not being done and therefore testing was the problem. So I'm trying to marry up the fact with the fact that we may not be testing, but then also I'm not sure that COVID has, is as rampant in Nigeria as it is in other parts of the world. Now, some people have said, oh, it's due to all sorts of reasons. Is it the heat? Is it that we built up our immune system? I don't know what the reasons are, but it just doesn't seem to be as rampant. Would you agree?
I agree. When you look at all the predictions that came few weeks or months ago, it was expected that COVID may be it's a pandemic already, that it will really take on Africa. But there's still a lot of unknown. This is a new disease, and the way it's progressing, it's not following all the patterns that all the modeling have been saying. That it's really good news to see that the cases in Africa overall are not increasing quite significantly, but at the same time we just need to really be very careful and continue to test and watch the numbers, given that when you look in Nigeria, we started with the 2000s at the beginning of the week. We're ending the week with more than 3,000 cases that have been detected. Yes. So it's increasing. But also the other thing I wanted to say is that when you look at, how African governments have reacted to COVID, it's quite unprecedented. It was really impressive how they took very, very, clear measures, like lockdown and control, the pandemic. And that may have had also an impact in terms of slowing, how fast the pandemic has progressed.
Flattening the curve, as they say. We're learning all these new technologies about, flattening the curve and, yes. Now, talking about organizations and those that you funded and all of that, you have funded also partly the World Health Organization. You make donations to them, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Now, there's been a massive argument in some quarters, I'm not going to mention who, I mean, some of them we know, but even some other parties who have no reason to have a grudge against the World Health Organization are saying that they were slow to respond, to call this a pandemic when it did become a pandemic, and they announced they were too slow with the numbers and, you know, all these conspiracies around, you know, they were just, anyway, I don't want to talk about the conspiracies, but in terms of, you know, the fact that they've been criticized for not being as quick to respond and to call this a pandemic and to share numbers and information. What are your views on that and how the World Health Organization has responded?
You know, I think we know from experiences that, you know, coronaviruses in general, because this is not the first coronavirus, this is a novel coronavirus. They're quite challenging, right? You know, when you look at the emergency of, you know, the MERS or the SARS, you know, they require public health officials to respond rapidly in the face of limited data. You know, but the capacity of them to do it quickly, it's quite instrumental. And, you know, we think that, you know, WHO is taking, you know, the necessary step to really slow the spread of the pandemic. You know, when you look at the work that they're doing here in Nigeria, for example, they're the only development partners who sit into the PTF, the Presidential Task Force, as providing technical assistance and really helping. And it's, you know, the only organization that has 194 countries, you know, together and then really helping to come together. So, you know, they're doing their best. When you look at what
responded in time, I mean, because the criticism is that they didn't respond, you know, they were very slow to responding to the fact that this was a global pandemic and making those announcements. I mean, that's what everyone is saying. Do you agree with that, or you don't agree?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, for me, the time now is really to see the pandemic that we have in hand and really try to, you know, follow WHO guidance and work with them and try to contain this pandemic. You know, there may be a time where we will all collectively sit and look back and, you know, try to analyze those.
That's lessons learned, right? Because
yeah.
I think what's important is that nobody saw this coming. You know, because if we did, we would have all planned better. But I think it's also important that as leaders in our various sectors or whatever it is that we're doing, that if something didn't quite work out, or if, you know, if things didn't go according to plan, we need to be able to say, come next time, we need to be able to do it better. Because if not, then we lose faith in these organizations if they're not going to react and respond as we expect them to respond. So I guess, as you said, let's pray for the pandemic to be over. So maybe at some point we can all sit down and we can address some of these issues and some of the criticism that's come to say, God forbid, we don't want to see another pandemic, but how do we prepare better? But let's talk about vaccinations, which is obviously a big thing for the foundation. You know, globally, there's been a lot going on. Everybody just seems to be doing their own thing. This country, you hear today someone is trying this and someone's trying that, and you know, there's a lot of confusion out there about what is going on. I mean, one minute we heard it was an anti-malaria drug that was going to work, and everybody was getting excited. And I believe one of our governors even recently said that he said he took it and it cured him. I don't know, but the thing is that what do we do about this vaccination? What happens in the event that we don't find a vaccination, or the vaccination doesn't come for the next 2 or 3 years? I mean, how does all that work? What sort of, you know, based on the predictive modeling that the foundation does and the investments you make in that, what does the foundation have to say about that?
Thank you very much. So the foundation has quite a long experience in vaccinations, given that, you know, when you look at public health, you know, experience, vaccines are one of the very, you know, powerful, you know, intervention that really has the potential to save millions of lives. And, you know, we've seen the power of vaccines. And when you look at, you know, COVID and the potential of, you know, the global partnership and collaboration that has come together to really put hands together to try to really get a vaccine, you know, it's not a competition who will get it first. You know, is really, you know, the global community coming together, the G7, G20, you know, the pharmaceutical companies, WHO, UNICEF, and Gavi, you know, all coming together, including the Gates Foundation as well, you know, under the umbrella of CEPI. You know, I know I don't know if you've probably heard about CEPI, which is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which was created, 4 years ago. And, Mr. Bill Gates, was talking about really, we may be having a pandemic in the future, right? And the foundation and other donors put money together. I think having CEPI coordinate that, it gives hope that, the first candidates, are already going into clinical trials, right? So like when you have human trials, etc. So because vaccine takes a lot of time, to develop, because you need it to be safe, you need it to be, effective, and you need to test it. You need to really make sure that you pay attention to.
Where are the big trials happening? And is there a particular drug that's being tried that you can tell us about, that the foundation is supporting?
So the foundation is supporting, a coalition of many drugs, and some of, but in terms of vaccine, for example, I would say, there are, one which has gone to clinical trial, and the trials, but I can come back to you with more details. But the trials going on in probably in European countries, yeah.
Okay, so basically,
but I have colleagues in the global, health team that are really working very closely on that. Yeah.
Is there a name for this particular vaccine? Is there a particular country where we can say, because we hear about certain vaccines and then we hear, oh, it's not as effective anymore, or it's not working. So is there one that there is some that's giving us some hope now?
I'm not in a position to give you details about one particular, but I know that there are a number of very good candidates that are going through, the phases, because you have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And also one thing that the foundation is doing is to say, one thing that provides a lot of delays in terms of really when you have one candidate which has fulfilled all the requirements, it's really the production capacity, right? To make sure that, you can produce it in a very, very big, large number. So the foundation with many, many other partners are really working hard to make sure that as soon as, there are some candidates that are promising, they will be able to really work collectively with others to produce those, because obviously there will be, productions, there'll be a lot of need for those vaccines. And given that we care a lot, for poorest countries, we'll work with Gavi, for example, to make sure that, poor countries also have access to those vaccines.
Please keep us updated on that, because I think the world is waiting for it's like we're waiting for this to happen. But I mean, realistically, I'm no scientist or doctor or anything like that, but just by being an ordinary layperson that reads about all these things, I don't know, I would say we're 18 to 24 months away from a vaccine. And if that's the case, we then have to say to ourselves, how do we live through the next 18 to 24 months is really the big question we're all asking ourselves. But you said earlier that we've handled this pandemic well in Nigeria and obviously across the continent. And the lockdown was eased recently in the last week. The lockdown was eased in Nigeria. Do you think that the lockdown came at a good time? Do you think maybe, because everybody's fear is that with the lockdown being eased, everybody's going to rush out there, and then, things that, people are going to be doing what they shouldn't be doing. But what are your views on the lockdown being eased when it was?
Yeah, these are, difficult questions that, many leaders across the world are struggling with. When you look at the news, today in the US, across many states, the debate is quite similar to the debate that we're having in Africa now. People are asking, the lockdown to be eased because of the, huge economic impact of the lockdown. And, when you look across Africa, I think government made, the right decision at the right time. And also after, I think that provided time for the government to come up with plans, to really also provide some support to the poorest of the poor, to help them, for people who could, who live on a day by day, basis, to really help them as well. And then, the impact of, the lockdown in our country is just, it's huge. And you need to balance that. This is where, leaders are really balancing, life
versus livelihoods, isn't it, really?
Versus livelihood, and I'll add one more component there when we're not talking a lot about it. So I think it's really a triangle, managing economic, you know, like, you know, even in Nigeria, there's some other complexity with the drop of oil price, etc. So, you know, the government is really thinking about that. And there is the, you know, managing the spread of the, you know, the pandemic, because the cases are going up. But then also there is the need to maintain existing, you know, essential services.
Yes.
You know, because if you lock down, so if one, you know, person has, you know, a woman need to go deliver, you know, how she goes there, right? I think easing that will give time, you know, for every players to really think about innovative ways of living in these new ways. So what the government is putting in place new measures, and we're all together going to come up with new way of doing this, and
Absolutely.
you know, finding our path through this.
Yes, and talking about, you know, how we're all living and all the things that we do, especially in our continent and Nigeria, you know, social distancing is something that is alien to a lot of people. And it's alien to a lot of the people that even your foundation focuses upon. People are living in dwellings that are probably no larger than, I don't know, you can literally just maybe fit a bed in there and a chair. And many people are living in these very tight-knit communities, because that's how a lot of the people below the poverty line are living. So when all the communication that you developed and the people that you're working with on the communication that you said you developed earlier, what is the message to those people? Because they cannot even understand the concept of social distancing. And even if we say they should understand the concept of social distancing, they're living in a space that doesn't allow for social distancing. Many people are living in a space where they have to share a bathroom, they have to share a toilet, they only have one room. So how do we, it's a challenge, Dr. Basinga. How do we resolve that?
Yeah, so there is no question that physical distancing measure will be more challenging in low-income countries, you know, where many people do not have separate room or quarantine, as you say, right? So, and they, you know, rely on, shared meals, etc. So, you know, I think we need to work with partners in Africa, in Southern Asia, to really understand, you know, those policies and try to tailor them in our own local context. Like, we really need to come together and then to empower local communities, traditional leaders, and, you know, religious leaders, and, you know, etc., to sit with them and try to really explain collectively, you know, the mechanics of this virus, how it's being transmitted, etc., so that they can come up with homegrown solutions to come up with, you know, the way of doing social distancing in our way. It may not be 100% effective, but better try it, you know, to see how well we can do it, than just, you know, say that it's impossible. But like, there may be ways that we as Africans, as, you know, countries, we can really make that happen.
Well, I think we need to really, it's something we need to focus on, you know, and everyone that's out there listening today, because, yeah, I mean, I can live in my house and I can social distance. It's not a problem for me, but it's a big problem. It's a massive problem for a lot of people that your particular foundation is focusing on. And you know, we can't suddenly say we're going to go and build housing estates where this person's going to have the, we know those are not real, they're not realistic, solutions. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I really wonder about how we resolve that. I don't know how we resolve that. It's a major challenge. Major challenge.
Yeah. This is one of the, you know, as a foundation, you know, we are not in a position to come up with a solution, but working through partners at a local level, you know, this is the time where we can really work with our, you know, like civil societies and partners, local level people, to really come up with the solution.
You're not,
you know, but the first they need to.
Yes, I mean, we're not expecting you to come and resolve all of Nigeria's problems, or even resolve any of them. We appreciate the, you know, the support you do give all over the world. It's just that, you know, it's an opportunity for us to talk about these challenges and to say, how do we find solutions to them, for the communities that, you know, that we both serve, you know. Now, sometime last year, your foundation sponsored a simulation of a pandemic at the Johns Hopkins University, which, you know, when I was reading about it, I thought, wow, and what were the results of that, do you know, in terms of how that was managed, and what came of the simulation in terms of the numbers of people involved and the end results of it? Did you have any idea at all?
You know, since the Ebola outbreak in 2014, we have been, really engaged, with an array of partners and, effort to really try to understand global preparedness, against potential pandemic. We try to think about those issues, ahead of time. And this, includes some part of, because it really inform the development of vaccine therapeutics and diagnostics, etc., in a more transparent way. And, we walked through the Johns Hopkins University. They did those simulations, but they will be in a much better position to really explain, the role, because their result is published, online. But it was to say, as a global community, we need to be, ready, because, to kind of like understand if there is a next pandemic, at what speed it will spread, how long it will take, etc. And then in parallel, how long people will be able to sequence, the virus, understand the virus, so that you can develop, help, etc. It has been really helping.
So the major takeaway would you say the major takeaway from that was being prepared for a pandemic going forward? That would be one of the major takeaways.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, before I let you go, a couple of more questions. I don't know if it's true or not, but there were some rumblings this week about a vaccine bill not being subjected to the traditional legislative proceedings in Nigeria, and that something to do with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Did you read about that?
Yeah, but as a foundation that is active across the globe, we work in very diverse setting, and we are not involved directly in legislations.
Yes.
Exactly. And
claiming that, I don't know, what I read was, of course, you're not going to say, and I don't expect you to, and it probably isn't as it is, but what I read was that something about, you trying to sort of force a particular bill through and all of that. I'm sure you saw those articles, right?
Yes, but contrary to Frost report, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has offered no financial incentive to Nigeria legislative branch, toward passage of any bill. We, as the foundation, we are there to strict ethical and legal guidelines across area of our operation, all area of our operation. And, specifically in Nigeria, we are working in partnership with international organizations, local organizations, civil societies in support of the government, but we are not involved at all in those issues that were discussed.
But do you think vaccinations should be compulsory in that regard? Do you think that, there should be legislation to guide such things, and that it should become compulsory?
No, this is a discussion that the Nigerian government and legislature should have.
Okay. So, but would you say that the foundation would support vaccinations being compulsory, as that
no,
is?
As a foundation, we don't comment on any legislation or provide any input. Yeah.
Okay. My last question, and it comes from a place of, concern for some people that felt that Melinda Gates shouldn't have made certain comments on CNN. I know she probably said it from a place of concern, because she said that, obviously she loves the continent of Africa, blah, blah, blah. But part of what was said, I think did upset a certain number of people, and based on the way it was said, that, if we didn't take care, that we would start seeing, people dropping dead on the streets of Lagos, or the streets of Nigeria. And this did obviously send fear and anxiety to a lot of people. I mean, I was interviewing a life coach, Larry Olushola, a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things he said is that we need to be careful about the things we say and the things we do, because if it's the anxiety and the fear comes from what we're hearing all the time. And, you wake up and you turn on, every single news channel in the world is talking about, 24/7, it's COVID this and COVID that. But what are your views on what she said in terms of, because as I said earlier in the interview, we may not be doing all the testing that we need to do, but outside of not doing all the testing that we need to do, we've also seen that people aren't dropping dead. We've coped fairly well with the pandemic. And as you said, the foundation is not there to replace the work of the government. And, if our governments and states are trying to do the best that they can to manage these sorts of situations, and then she goes on CNN and says something like that, it could be construed as, counterproductive in some regards, and could obviously make certain people anxious about, oh my God, that kind of thing. So, it probably didn't come from a place of trying to make anyone anxious or whatever, but it was said. What's the foundation's response to that interview?
You know, when you look at what you know, government across Africa, including in Nigeria, have been able to do to respond to this pandemic, you know, given the resources that they have, given the time, given other pressing issues that they're dealing with, you know, at the foundation, we've been, you know, really impressed by the action that they've taken, because it has saved, you know, a lot of life, prevent a lot of infections, etc. And, you know, when you look at the action that have been taken across the world in this pandemic, you know, flattening the curve and, you know, social distancing, etc., as we've been discussing with you, most of them are, you know, not applicable here. But people have been coming up with, you know, innovative ways and trying to really do their best to control this pandemic as they can. So this is the only thing I'll say. We at the foundation, we're really, really impressed. Yeah.
So her views are therefore not valid because people aren't dropping dead on this. We haven't seen, I mean, people are dying all over the world actually, but I wouldn't say the numbers in Africa are any higher than any, you know, they're not higher in Africa, even without the testing. So I guess that maybe that statement was kind of like, I don't know what to say about that statement. And I guess I don't want to put you on the spot about having to respond, but, you know, before I did this interview, I mean, I spoke to a number of people and I said, what would you like me to ask? And this question was obviously one of the questions that was burning for some people, to say that, you know, was there a basis for her saying that people are going to be dropping dead on the streets? But as you said, you know, I'm glad that the foundation believes that Nigeria and other countries across the continent are doing their best to manage this pandemic, and we're glad that people aren't dropping dead on the streets. And we just pray for a better day when all of this will be long gone, and we'll be able to get back to the new normal, I assume, whatever that new normal. What do you see the new normal being? What is your new normal? Are you ever going to go to a cinema again? Are you ever going to go shopping in a mall, or are you going to shop online now? What is your new normal for you going to be like, do you think, in the next few months?
I hope the new normal will be if I'll have the opportunity to be you know, more show in person, not like this one.
Yes, yes.
It will probably be a new normal. Yeah, I think you know, it's very difficult to think about it. You know, I was discussing with my wife this morning about how challenging it is to teach our 6-year-old at home. You know, it's just challenging. And we're just discussing that this may take us more than we think. You know, we may not go back, you know, to our new normal, you know, before soon. But yeah, it will be a new, different world, right? In terms of, you know, how we interact with each other, how we travel, when we travel, and, you know, how we spend, how we save, and how, you know, what do we value as human beings, etc. So yeah, I'm really looking forward for that new normal.
The new normal, the new normal, the new normal. We are waiting for the new normal. But I guess the world has to create the new normal, because we are the ones that have to create the services so be it aviation, be it hospitality, be it media, like we're having this interview now. Maybe this is the way that the world is going to go, that we're never going to do face-to-face interviews anymore. I'm just going to send you a link and we're going to, so I guess.
And then we connect.
And then we connect, yes, and we get the time right. So it's really a matter of, you know, I just say God have mercy on us all, because that seems to be he seems to be the only one right now that has the answers to all of this in my book.
Definitely.
Basinga, thank you so much for.
Thank you. But I wanted to say one thing before we close. Yes. You know, it's something that, you know, I've been thinking a lot about, and as many people, it's just to really, from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of the foundation, to thank all the frontline health workers who are out there. Yes. You know, in difficult conditions where, you know, getting PPE is challenging, but they wake up in the morning, they go to work, they do their work, and they come back to their family with the risk of, you know, probably bringing back the virus, but they are just keeping going. So just wanted to make sure that we, you know, keep them on our thoughts. Yeah.
We must keep them in our prayers and say, Father Lord God, please, you know, just protect them all and keep them all safe, you know. Yeah, they're doing a fantastic job. They truly, because without them, really, we wouldn't have any chance of fighting this or beating this without our frontline healthcare workers. But thank you so much for remembering them.
Thank you, Mo. Yeah.
Thank you for all the work that you're doing at the foundation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.